gently to my knees, and I am lost for soul, lost in love. I'm sweetly broken, holy surrender. At the cross you beckon me, draw me gently to my knees, and I am lost for soul, lost in love. I am sweetly broken, holy surrender.
So, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the end time lessons from my place. Again, just to reiterate, usually we did these lessons at church at Kingston Alliance Church in Kingston, Ontario. But during the COVID-19, we started to do them from my place. So I'm gonna be streaming tonight. It's gonna be the lesson is gonna be Trump, Jerusalem, Armageddon. So it's a bit of a follow-up from last week. Nothing about politics, by the way. We're not here to do politics. Strongly believe that every president were elected was always God's choice. So, but since Trump has taken over in 2016, everything turned around basically, and we can clearly see the end time prophecies basically coming together. For example, all the past president and most presidents and prime ministers in the world and king or whatever are all pushing for globalism. But the Bible says that globalism via world government, the UN basically is the only body that we have that can implement basically a world government. So that's why we're always talking about the UN. So basically every president, you can imagine if the US had not been part of the UN, the UN would have probably never launched, or could have launched but never went anywhere. This is proven by the fact that between after the First World War, actually, we had the League of Nations, and the US didn't want to take part of it, so they launched the League of Nations, but it didn't take off because the US wouldn't. So when after the Second World War, they pushed again for the world government, which is the UN. They called it the United Nations this time, and the US wouldn't get in unless they had veto power, and so that's why the US has veto power with the 5 permanent members of the UN. So they all have veto powers on the Security Council. So basically, every president before Donald Trump were very much globalist. You can Google it, and you can look at every president, the agendas they had. The big difference with President Trump, when he actually was running for president, big change. People are Christians and end-time prophecies, basically. People started listening when he started talking about being anti-globalism and being for like a patriot, being for the sovereignty of nations instead of a one world government. So this is what changed it all, because the Bible basically explains that the US will not be part of the world government. It doesn't mean that it's going to get out of the world government. It just says that it's going to be protecting. It's not part of it. The nation, the eagle, is not represented in the end time world government, but it also says that it's going to be protecting Israel. So it doesn't mean that it's going to get out of the United Nations 100%, because the best way to be protecting Israel is with their veto power, obviously, at the UN. So, and that's what they've been doing for a while now. And so we're gonna go through the video, and during the video I'll show you. The video, I think, is 2 years old, so it's not the latest update. President Trump has done so much more, a lot in regard to prophecies, in regard to the United Nations. You can see, you can hear, like I'm sure you remember a few things that he's done as well. But to get out, to get the U.S. out of the, or to give less support to the UN. So it's all prophetic. The U.S. basically is not going to be pushing the world government agenda. Why is this big? Because the Bible says that the world government will take its power from the dragon, basically. So the dragon is going to drive the agenda. So the dragon, we all know who the dragon is Satan. So so that's why, like, basically, if you don't see all the Satanist agenda basically behind, it's deception. We're gonna see it a lot more once the Antichrist takes over the UN or the world government. Basically, this is when it's gonna change for 100%. But right now, what we can see is mostly precursors. Like, we're getting ready. Everything is getting ready for it. So today, actually, there was a pretty good show again on the endtime.com. You can see it at 4 o'clock every day. They stream a video. The updates were a lot. They were giving update. Dave Robbins was giving a lot of updates on the world government, the ID 2020, basically the ID 2020, and all these identification agendas and push basically to identify everybody on the globe, basically. It's a big push for a precursor for the mark of the beast. Obviously, we know the mark of the beast is going to be something that you're going to have to take or pledge allegiance to the world government, basically, while you take it. So basically, it might not be the technology that you take. Let's say your credit card. It doesn't matter that if you use a credit card now, but if you have to use to pledge allegiance to the United Nations in, like, say 10 years, when the mark of the beast, or I'm just throwing dates here, but there's nothing for sure. But let's say 10 years from now, the mark of the beast gets implemented, and it's your credit card that you can't buy or sell without your pledging allegiance. You can't use this credit card without pledging allegiance, basically, to the United Nations. That's what would the mark of the beast would be, basically. Not the fact that you're buying with the credit card, is the fact that you have to pledge allegiance to the Antichrist's world government to be able to buy or sell. So we can do a lesson, the understanding the end time. We're gonna start over probably in the fall. There is a lesson on the mark of the beast, which we'll probably do back then. So I'm gonna show a couple hellos to Paul. Hello, Paul. Good evening. Welcome, Ian and Bud as well. I saw earlier. So welcome all, and don't hesitate if you're on, and you can say hello, and don't hesitate to ask questions as well on the chat. I'll be answering them, and you can ask questions, and I'll be giving updates as well. So quick prayer to open our hearts and minds. So Lord, I want to thank you for this technology, that we can all be together even though we're apart, and all come together and to spend time with you and learning about your prophecies and your Bible, to give us understanding, so that we're not deceived in the end time. Lord, may you open our minds, open our hearts to what you have to teach us tonight. and may we be able to use it efficiently to bring people closer to you, my Lord. So I want to pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, so we're gonna go right to the video. I don't see any questions right now, so that's good. I'm gonna go right to the video, but don't hesitate. Like I said, I'm just gonna be on the chat as well. So here we go.
Trump, Jerusalem, and Armageddon. Days after winning the U.S. presidential election, President Trump said in an interview with the Wall Street Journal concerning an Israeli-Palestinian peace agreement, "That's the ultimate deal. As a deal maker, I'd like to do the deal that can't be made, and to do it for humanity's sake." He referred to the conflict as the war that never ends. He called it the ultimate deal. The goal of this lesson today is, number one, explain how we've reached the present situation. Two, disclose President Trump's efforts toward peace so far. Three, describe where we are right now. And four, reveal what the prophecies say will happen. So, what has produced the present situation in Israel? In order to understand it, we're going back 4,000 years. God made a covenant with a man by the name of Abraham in Genesis chapter 15, verse number 18. Listen to it. "In the same day, the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, Unto thy seed have I given this land, from the river of Egypt in the south unto the great river, the river Euphrates in the north." Now, this promise by God that Abraham and his descendants after him would have this land from the river of Egypt to the Euphrates, the area called the Promised Land, is the world's number one dispute today, 4,000 years later. When God made this statement, Abraham was in Beersheba, a town about 50 miles south of Jerusalem. So God promised this area we call the Promised Land to Abraham. And yet here we are 4,000 years later, and it's the number one dispute in world politics today. Well, 600 years after this, led by Joshua, Israel entered the Promised Land around 1400 BC. Then, 400 years after that, King David moved Israel's capital from Hebron to Jerusalem. That happened around 1000 BC. King David's son, King Solomon, built Israel's first temple on the Temple Mount in 968 BC. This began what now is known as the First Temple Era. The First Temple Era extended from 968 BC until 586 BC. Judah, by that time, had gone into idolatry. They had gone into all kinds of ungodliness. Because of this, God sent Jeremiah the prophet to tell them, because of your iniquity, you're going to be carried away into captivity, into Babylon. I have to do this to strip you down to the bare so I can start all over again with you, because I want to restore you to where you should be. Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, came, carried the children of Israel away, the people of Judah away, and that began 70 years of exile. This 70 years of exile, specifically prophesied by Jeremiah the prophet, continued from 606 BC until 536 BC. The first temple was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar in 586 BC. Then in 538 BC, God raised up a Persian king who had overthrown the kingdom of Babylon and began the kingdom of the Medes and the Persians. This Persian king's name was Cyrus. Cyrus was prophesied before he was ever born in Isaiah chapter 44 and 45. The prophecy stated that he would be anointed to build the temple of God. So Cyrus gave the order in 538 BC. The second temple was finally completed by Zerubbabel in 516 BC. This began the Second Temple era, which extended from 516 BC until 70 AD. When Jesus came to the earth, he actually taught in the second temple that had been built by Zerubbabel and then made more beautiful by Herod the Great. Jesus prophesied the destruction of the second temple. The prophecy is found in Matthew 24, verse 1 through 2. And Jesus went out and departed from the temple, and his disciples came to him for to show him the buildings of the temple. The Jews were very proud of their temple, and so they wanted to show Jesus, look at what Herod the Great has done. He's made this much larger, much more beautiful, until it's been known as the most beautiful building in the entire world. Jesus shocked them. Here's what he said. He said unto them, see ye not all these things? Verily I say unto you, there shall not be left here one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. It was like throwing ice water in the faces of the Jewish disciples. Nevertheless, that prophecy was given somewhere around 30 AD. 40 short years later, the Romans came in 70 AD, and they totally destroyed the second temple. Then the Jews were sent in exile from the promised land. They remained in exile from 70 AD until 1948. I'm talking about 1,878 years. What was the horrible transgression that the Jewish people did in order to deserve this kind of exile? Well, their Messiah came to them, and he was more than the Messiah. He was God manifest in the flesh. He came when the God that they claimed to love and serve came to them. He didn't resemble the God they had created in their own mind, and so they hated him. They crucified him. That started the exile from 70 AD until 1948 AD. Now, toward the beginning of the 20th century, the desire to return to their promised land stirred in the hearts of the Jewish people. I mean, for all this time, almost 2,000 years, they had been sifted through the nations from one nation to the other, Europe and around the world. Now they yearned to go home. Then came World War I. It was the worst war ever. There'd never been a war with 1 million fatalities till that time. But when this war hit in 1914, 8.2 million were killed. They called it the Great War. So things are getting worse in the world. And the Jews yearned to have a place they could call their own because they had been persecuted so many times. Many different Jewish leaders made their way to other leaders around the world, urging them to help create a homeland for the Jewish people. The British Empire in particular, which came out of World War I as the most powerful force in the world, there were Jewish people going to the British Empire and saying, please set aside, now in the chaos of World War I, the Ottoman Empire has been defeated. The Ottoman Empire had ruled the area called Palestine, which contained the Holy Land. They had ruled it for the last 400 years. Now the Turks are defeated. The Ottoman Empire is vanquished. And now the British have control of the area called Palestine. So Jewish leaders went to the British government and said, please set aside an area for a Jewish homeland. This resulted in 1917 in what's called the Balfour Declaration. Here's what the Balfour Declaration said. His Majesty's government views with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, and will use its best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object. Foreign Minister James Arthur Balfour sent that to Lord Walter Rothschild on November the 2nd of 1917. The Jewish people were ecstatic. Now, just 3 years after this, in 1920, the League of Nations got together and created the British Mandate. They mandated that Britain would be over the administration of the area of Palestine. And it was at this time in 1920 that the Balfour Declaration was adopted as international law by the newly created League of Nations. Well, just 20 years later, Adolf Hitler and the Nazis launched World War II against the world. During that time, 6 million Jews were marched off to concentration camps and put to a horrible death in the gas chambers of Nazi Germany and the concentration camps established. After World War II was over, the Jews said, this is enough. We are going home. Here you can see a picture of the ship called Exodus. Wealthy Jews around the world bought ships and began to transport Jews out of Europe, out of Asia, and take them back to the Promised Land. The Jewish people were seized with a desire. We have to have a place of our own. We've just come through this horrible persecution, 6 million dead at the hands of Adolf Hitler. Never again. We are going home. So they piled in ships. They sailed through the night. They would ram their ships up against the shores of the Promised Land. The Jews would spill over the side, sometimes being met with Arabs that would try to kill them. Even the British would try to resist them coming, and yet come they did. November the 29th, 1947, when the nations of the world realized the magnitude of this horrible crime that had been perpetrated against the Jewish people by Nazi Germany, they were guilt-ridden because many of them had resisted Jews fleeing to their countries as the Jews tried to get away from Adolf Hitler, but they wouldn't allow them in. So they all carried this guilt. On November the 29th of 1947, the United Nations, just 2 years old itself, voted to partition the territory of Palestine, the British Mandate. And they voted to create a Jewish state and a Palestinian state. This partition plan called for Jerusalem to be an international city under UN control, giving it neither to the Jews nor to the Arabs. Now, this resolution was non-binding since it was proposed by the UN General Assembly. Binding decisions have to be made by the UN Security Council. The Jews were so ecstatic, however, they accepted the partition plan. But the Arabs said, we want nothing to do with this. They rejected it. We want to drive the Jews into the sea. We want them out of the area called Palestine, the area originally called Israel. Well, the British decided they were going to pull out of Palestine. They had their forces there trying to keep the peace, but there was conflict continually between the Arabs and the Jews. So the British decided to declare their mandate was over. They set a deadline, May 14, 1948. So when the Jews knew the British were leaving, they realized they were going to be surrounded by hostile Arab populations. They were going to be on their own. And since the Arab had rejected the resolution creating an Israeli state, they had to make a decision. They decided on the same day, May the 14th, 1948, to declare their independence. Here you can see a video of David Ben-Gurion standing in Independence Hall in Tel Aviv, declaring the independence, the birth of the modern nation of Israel.
ביום קיום המנדט הבריטי על ארץ ישראל, אנו מכריזים בזאת על הקמת מדינה יהודית בארץ ישראל, היא מדינת ישראל. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, שהחיינו וקיימנו והגיענו לזמן הזה.
Then on May the 15th, 1948, after this Declaration of Independence, 5 Arab states launched war against Israel. Egypt in the south, Jordan in the east, Syria in the northeast, Lebanon in the north, and Iraq on the east side of Jordan. They all came over to try to snuff out the newborn nation of Israel before it could even catch its breath. Israel at that time had a population of only 600,000. They were surrounded by 42 million hostile Arabs. It looked like the nation would not last. However, miraculously, Israel not only survived, but actually gained more territory, not a lot more, but more territory than had originally been allocated by the UN General Assembly on November the 29th of 1947. Now, once they declared their independence, all these nations came pouring across their borders against Israel. Jordan came across the Jordan River, and they illegally occupied what's called Judea, Samaria, referred to today by the media as the West Bank. They occupied this from 1948 to 1967. It did not belong to Jordan. They had illegally come and grabbed it as part of the War of Independence. So you can see here on our map the area called the West Bank. That was under Jordanian control. You can see the way Israel looked from 1949 until 1967. Now, since Israel needed time to establish itself as a nation, they signed a ceasefire with Jordan. This was not a peace agreement. It was a ceasefire. They signed the ceasefire with Jordan on April the 3rd of 1949. Jordan also occupied half of Jerusalem, which included the Temple Mount. No Jews remained in the West Bank in Judea, Samaria by 1967. Jordan had ruthlessly driven them all out. Then by 1967, 19 years after the War of Independence, Egypt decided she was strong enough to take another attempt at destroying the nation of Israel and driving it totally out of the Middle East. UN troops had been established between the southern border of Israel and the northern border of Egypt into the eastern part of the world. He blockaded those straits of Tiran, which of course, when you blockade international waters, that's an act of war. Then Nasser signed military alliances with Syria and with Jordan. Here you can see the pictures of King Hussein of Jordan, Gamal Abdel Nasser of Egypt, and also Hafez Assad, who at that time was the head of Syria. But on May the 26th of 1967, Nasser made a speech. And in this speech, he blatantly revealed what he planned to do. Here's what he said. Taking over Sharm el-Sheikh meant confrontation with Israel, and also meant that we were ready to enter a general war with Israel. The battle will be a general one, and our basic objective will be to destroy Israel. So now Nasser has put his cards on the table. He's ordered out the UN troops. He's blockaded the Straits of Tiran. And now he makes this speech that his object is to destroy Israel. He had signed this military alliance with Hussein of Jordan, with Assad of Syria, and now he makes the speech, we are going to destroy Israel. Well, Israel is observing all this and realize that war is unavoidable. Consequently, rather than sitting as a sitting duck and just allowing all the Arab countries around it to attack, Israel decided that it would take the initiative. On June the 5th of 1967, Israeli planes left Israel, flying low over the waters of the Mediterranean. They flew 500 feet above land, and then they swept into Egypt. They caught Egypt by surprise and destroyed 90% of the Egyptian Air Force, while it never was able to get its planes off the ground. Now, Nasser called King Hussein of Jordan and said, jump into the war and help us. We're 1 hour south of Tel Aviv. Of course, he was lying. King Hussein was sent a message by the Prime Minister of Israel saying, we have nothing against you. If you'll stay out of this war, we will not bother you. But if you attack us, we're going to counterattack with all of our might. Well, Jordan, King Hussein, did not feel like he could stay out of the battle while his Arab brethren were fighting against the hated Zionist entity. So Jordan attacked Israel. Israel counterattacked, driving Jordan out of East Jerusalem and all the way back across the Jordan River from which he had come 19 years before. Israel also, during this war, decided to capture the Golan Heights in the north from Syria. Why? Because Syria had used the height advantage to lob shells down on the villages of northern Israel, and had been doing this all over during the last 19 years. Israel felt like they had to put a stop to it. So they attacked the Golan Heights. They drove Syria out of the Golan and took total control of the high ground, putting Israel in a much safer strategic position. Now you can see when the dust cleared, now remember all this happened in 6 days. It was the 1967 6 Days War. It was astounding that little Israel could totally defeat, totally rout Egypt, Jordan, and Syria, all in this war. So when the war stopped, a new map had been created. Now Israel controlled the West Bank, the area biblically called Judea and Samaria. Israel also had taken control of the Golan Heights in the north, plus had swept all the way to the Suez Canal in the south. Israel stood as the preeminent military power of the Middle East. The world was amazed, and also the world knew God must be with Israel. When finally on June the 7th, Israel took possession of the Temple Mount, the word went out to the world. The Temple Mount is in our hands. There was a chaplain with the Israeli forces at that time. His name was Rabbi Goren. And Rabbi Goren knew this was the redemption of Israel. So when the Jewish soldiers, led by General Uzi, went up onto the Temple Mount, Rabbi Goren had come prepared. In his knapsack were 2 large bundles of dynamite. He handed them to General Uzi and said, "Here's dynamite. Blow up these heathen worship sites." He's talking about the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the Dome of the Rock. I mean, the Arabs had come in and they had built their Muslim shrines in the places where originally the first and second temple had stood. Rabbi Goren said, "They've got to go, blow them up." General Uzi said, "Rabbi, be quiet." And then Rabbi Goren insisted and said, "No, you must do it now. You will go down in history if you will do it." General Uzi said, "Rabbi, be quiet, or I'm taking you to jail." Rabbi Goren bowed his head and walked away sadly. He knew something terrible had just taken place. So why was he so sure? Well, God told Israel what to do when they were brought into the promised land. It's found in Numbers chapter 33, verse 51 through 53. Listen to it. "Speak unto the children of Israel and say unto them, when you are passed over Jordan into Canaan, then you shall drive out all the inhabitants of the land from before you and destroy all their pictures and destroy all their molten images and quite pluck down all their high places." The Temple Mount was a high place. "And you shall dispossess the inhabitants of the land and dwell therein, for I have given you the land to possess it." Let's pause there just a moment. Go back 4,000 years. God told Abraham, Genesis chapter 15, verse 18, "This land is to be yours and your descendants after you forever." So when I bring you back here, you are to utterly drive out the inhabitants of the land. I've given it to you to possess it. So you are to destroy their images, their idols, you destroy their pictures, and any places of worship they have built on the high places. Purge the promised land of those places. And then in Numbers 33:55, God gave further instructions, telling the children of Israel, "But if you will not drive out the inhabitants of the land from before you, then it shall come to pass that those which you let remain of them shall be pricks in your eyes, thorns in your sides, and they shall vex you in the land wherein you dwell." This was the penalty for disobedience. God warned them. And remember, when Shlomo Goren said, "You've got to do this now," he was simply urging General Uzi to do what God told him to do. Well, he didn't do it, and guess what? It's been pricks in the eyes, thorns in the sides, and they have vexed the people of Israel ever since 1967. It should not have happened that way, but it did. Exodus 23:32 through 33 also says, don't make any peace treaty, don't make any covenant with the inhabitants of the land. Listen to it. "Thou shalt make no covenant with them, nor with their gods. They shall not dwell in thy land, lest they make thee sin against me. For if thou serve their gods, it will surely be a snare unto thee. So don't sign any treaties with them. They shall not dwell in your land." And yet Israel's all the time trying to sign treaties. Now, it's okay to sign treaties as long as you're signing treaties with countries outside of the land. But when you signed a treaty allowing non-Jewish people to stay in the land, you are in direct violation to Almighty God. Well, after the 1967 war and this stupendous victory by the tiny nation of Israel, Israel thought, now the Arabs will make peace with us. They know they can't defeat us. We're the premier power of the Middle East, so they'll make peace with us now. But it didn't happen. The Arab League got together at Khartoum, Sudan, August the 29th through September the 1st. They had a big all Arab meeting, and there they issued the famous 3 no's. No peace with Israel, no negotiations with Israel, and no recognition of Israel. Well, when the Jews realized there was no peace deal coming, they began to build in Judea. Now remember, when God told them, when I bring you to the land, you are to occupy the land. So the Jews began to build in the West Bank, in the territory they had captured, saying, God must have brought us into our promised land. They don't want a peace deal with us. Therefore, we are going to occupy the land. Then in 1979, Egypt and Israel got together to sign a peace agreement. President Carter of the United States talked with Anwar Sadat of Egypt and with Menachem Begin of Israel, and they got together to make a peace deal. You can see them here as they're concluding the treaty at Camp David here in the United States of America. The other 20 member states of the Arab League were so livid that Egypt had dared to make a peace agreement with Israel that they expelled Egypt from the Arab League. Then, in 1980, Israel took a very dramatic step. Israel annexed East Jerusalem. Now, they've taken this in war, but it didn't belong to anyone. The Palestinians had held it illegally, or pardon me, the Jordanians had held it illegally for 19 years since the War of Independence in 1948. Now Israel takes Jerusalem and now annexes East Jerusalem, putting all of Jerusalem together. They declared Jerusalem to be Israel's eternal, undivided capital. Now, God had said before, way back in the Old Testament, many times, I will put my name in Jerusalem. And I think it's about 37 times in the Old Testament. Now Israel is simply fulfilling what God said. They unified Jerusalem, making Jerusalem the capital. Now this was a huge step that the United Nations was going to resent bitterly, because they didn't want Israel to have Jerusalem as their capital. Why not, I wonder? I mean, after all other nations, they named their own capital, and now Israel controlled Jerusalem. I mean, I'm talking about all the nations of the world. Every single nation, the United Nations, accepts their capital except Israel. And they said, oh, now you cannot have Jerusalem. I got a feeling it's because God said, I'll put my name there. And Satan said, oh, really? If that's where you want your name, guess where I want mine. So the battle over Jerusalem began. And there have been 41 wars so far fought over control of Jerusalem. And it's not over. There's at least one more coming. The next war, or at least the final war, is going to be called the Battle of Armageddon. Well, in world affairs, there's a huge shift in 1989. The Berlin Wall fell. The Iron Curtain came down. It was the end of the Cold War, and it was declared by none other than our president at the time, George Herbert Walker Bush, that the New World Order had been born. Well, thinking in these terms, now we're going to have peace. The Iron Curtain's gone. East and West are getting along together. Cold War is over. Let's settle this pesky Middle East problem. It's time to make peace in the Middle East. So in 1991, there was a conference held in Madrid, Spain. It was called the Madrid Peace Conference. Driving forces behind it were President Herbert Walker Bush and his Secretary of State, James Baker. They held the meeting and they coerced Israel to go. Israel did not want to go, but they strong-armed Israel into going. It was attended by Israel and by a Jordanian Palestinian delegation. Also present were the United States and the USSR. Talks continued and then escalated when Yitzhak Rabin was elected the new prime minister of Israel in 1992. Now, as these talks progressed, the subject of Jerusalem inevitably came up. And Israel realized that their ownership of Jerusalem was going to be challenged, even though they've now annexed it, made it their united capital, tore down the separation barrier, the wall, the fence that had separated Jordan from Israel for 19 years. That's all gone. Even though they had done all that, they understood clearly that the nations of the world were going to challenge their right to have Jerusalem as their unified, undivided capital. So the leaders of Israel decided they better take a stand. They got together on May the 19th of 1993, and they signed a document called the Jerusalem Covenant. Now, look at this important quote, and I couldn't give it all to you here, but let me give you a little bit of it. Once again, our feet stand within your gates, O Jerusalem. Jerusalem, built as a city joined together, which unites the people of Israel to one another and links heavenly Jerusalem with earthly Jerusalem. From this place, we once again take this vow. Notice it's a vow. If I forget thee, O Jerusalem, may my right hand lose its strength. May my tongue cleave to my palate. If I do not remember you, if I do not raise up Jerusalem at the very height of my rejoicing. We have been martyred for you. We have yearned for you. We have clung to you. Our faithfulness to you we shall bequeath to our children after us. Forevermore, our home shall be within you. And this document, the Jerusalem Covenant, was signed by the Prime Minister of Israel, Yitzhak Rabin, by the President of Israel, Ezer Weizmann, by the Mayor of Israel, Teddy Kollek, by the Speaker of the Knesset, Sheva Weiss, and by many other officials of Israel at the time. Israel was taking a stand. This is not negotiable. We will not surrender control of Jerusalem. And by the way, this covenant, it's about a 6-foot-long document. It's on display in the main floor of the Israeli Knesset building to this very moment. They entered into covenant. Why is that so important? Remember what we're talking about today? Trump, Jerusalem, Armageddon. Now you see that this battle's been shaping up for 4,000 years, ever since God made that covenant with Abraham. Okay. So on September the 9th of 1993, the Oslo Peace Accords were struck. Arafat, Rabin, and President Clinton, together on the White House lawn, agreed to the Oslo Peace Accords. They set in place a peace process that they hoped would settle all the problems. Then, in 1994, since peace was in process, King Hussein of Jordan moved to make peace with Israel, and they signed the peace accord in 1994. However, the dispute over Jerusalem was still simmering in international politics. Because of that, the U.S. Senate and the U.S. House of Representatives passed a document called the Jerusalem Embassy Act of 1995. So it happened on October the 23rd of 1995. The U.S. Congress passed the Jerusalem Embassy Act, and this law required the moving of the U.S. Embassy in Israel from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem by May the 31st of 1999. Now let's pause there. What had happened was when Israel had declared Jerusalem its unified eternal capital back in 1980, the United Nations passed a resolution stating that no one should put their embassies in Jerusalem, that the status of Jerusalem had to be left for final status talks. So the UN rejected, once again, Israel's control over the city of Jerusalem. Now, I would remind you that Jerusalem has never been the capital of any other city throughout history, but it's been the capital of Israel for 3,000 years. And even though all of the nations get to name their capital and the UN recognizes it, this one little nation, Israel, the UN says, oh no, you cannot have Jerusalem for your capital because it's the place where God chose to put his name. And Satan does not want it to be the heart and the soul of the Jewish people. Okay, so the act, the Jerusalem Embassy Act, called for Jerusalem to remain an undivided city. Notice that. It's in our laws. It's a U.S. law. And for it to be recognized as the capital of the state of Israel. If the U.S. president believed this action would endanger national security, they built in an out clause. He could sign a waiver delaying the move for 6 months until things died down in the world. The law was adopted by the Senate 93-5 and the House 374-37. It was passed overwhelmingly in both houses of Congress. Now, Presidents Clinton, Bush, and Obama verbally said Jerusalem was Israel's capital and should remain united. Clinton and Bush specifically promised to move the embassy to Jerusalem. But they all broke their promise. They all disobeyed the Jerusalem Embassy Act. And so from 1995, for the next 22 years, the presidents used the excuse of endangering national security, signing the waiver every 6 months. 44 times they've had to do it. Every 6 months, they signed the waiver. Oh, I can't do this right now. It would endanger national security. Of course, that wasn't even true. The true reason was fear of offending the Arabs and the United Nations. Let's look now at what President Trump is doing to reach peace in the Middle East. He already had said the ultimate deal would be to bring about a peace agreement. And he also promised to move the embassy, speaking before IPAC, which is the American Israeli Public Affairs Committee, on March the 21st, 2016, candidate Donald Trump stated emphatically, we will move the American embassy to the eternal capital of the Jewish people, Jerusalem. Many presidents promised and then broke their promises. So people wondered, will he really? Well, he was elected president, to everyone's shock. And President Obama had not said anything about Jerusalem as long as the campaign was in progress, because he was afraid he would tilt the campaign in the favor of Donald Trump instead of for Hillary Clinton. But once Hillary lost the election, Obama now could do what he wanted to do. Even though he's a lame duck president, he still has power. He doesn't leave office until January the 20th of 2017. So the rumors begin to fly that Obama was going to allow, and not only allow, but promote a resolution at the UN that would declare Israel's presence in Jerusalem as illegal. It happened on December the 23rd of 2016. It was UN Resolution 2334. So President Obama's true feelings toward Israel were now publicly displayed for all the world to see. He had not gotten along with Israel, and he and Netanyahu had a very bitter relationship, but they kept it under wraps because that's a very unpopular thing for an American president to do, because Americans love Israel. Now then, Obama doesn't care. He's out of office. The Democrats have lost the election. So now he's going to do what he wants to do. On December the 23rd, 2016, the UN passed Resolution 2334, which stated that Israel's presence in the territories liberated from Jordanian occupation during the 1967 Six-Day War, including East Jerusalem, was a flagrant violation of international law. UN Ambassador Samantha Powers, simply raising her hand to vote no, would have blocked this resolution, since America has veto power on the UN Security Council. But President Obama had ordered Powers to abstain allowing the resolution to become international law. This was Obama's revenge against Israel. I call it the Armageddon resolution. This one act of infamy officially placed Israel in violation of international law because of her annexation of East Jerusalem in 1980, declaring United Jerusalem her eternal undivided capital. On December 23, 2016, President Obama sowed the seeds for the Battle of Armageddon, when the Bible prophesies that all nations will gather against Jerusalem to battle. Zechariah 14:2 talks about the Battle of Armageddon and specifically says, all nations. How could that happen? The United Nations represent all the nations of the world. All nations will come against Jerusalem to battle. They now have the legal basis for doing it. Resolution 2334. It's been passed by the world government body. Now Israel is in violation of that resolution. And it could be enforced by UN forces, and it will be, but not now. It's going to be a while. Now, the incoming Trump administration, knowing what was afoot, attempted to block Resolution 2334. They talked to other members of the UN Security Council, trying to get them to veto, but they were unsuccessful. So now the inauguration takes place on January the 20th of 2017. What's President Trump going to do toward the Middle East? He didn't wait. He said that's going to be his number one goal. He immediately appointed his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, and his most trusted assistant, Jason Greenblatt. Jason Greenblatt had been his personal attorney for 20 years. He appointed them to lead the effort to reach a peace agreement in the Middle East. They launched their efforts within 1 week of the inauguration, and they worked incessantly for the first 10 months of Trump's presidency, meaning with Netanyahu of Israel, Abbas of the Palestinians, and other Arab leaders, to show you how intense they were attempting to reach progress. In the first 7 months alone, they met with Palestinian leader Abbas at least 20 times. That's an average of 3 times a month. So Greenblatt and Kushner are back and forth from America to the Middle East, visiting with Arab leaders, with Jewish leaders, but mainly what they did, they were asking questions. How do you stand on this? How do you stand on that? Without revealing America's feelings whatsoever. Jason Greenblatt was doing the heavy lifting, and he had everyone liking him. The Arabs were liking him. Well, as things went, President Trump began to himself meet with Middle East leaders. 10 days after his inauguration, on January the 30th, he met with Jordan's King Abdullah II, because Jordan has a very great amount of influence when it comes to the Middle East. Then on February the 15th, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu visited the White House. Then on March the 14th, Saudi Deputy Crown Prince Salman was in Washington, D.C. Then on April the 3rd, Egyptian President al-Sisi was invited to the White House. Then on May the 3rd, Palestinian Chairman Abbas. Do you get the picture? Trump is putting this on the front burner, trying to get a peace deal done, just like he said. He said it would be the ultimate deal. And he prides himself in making difficult deals. Well, while Jason Greenblatt is making friends with all the Arabs, they liked him so much that they invited him to attend their annual Arab League meeting held on the Jordanian side of the Dead Sea. He was the highest American official ever allowed to attend. Then, when President Trump decided to take his first overseas visit, where did he go? He went to Saudi Arabia, May the 21st. Then, after leaving Saudi Arabia, where he was very well received, he also went to Israel and visited Mahmoud Abbas in the Palestinian territories. While in Saudi Arabia, he spoke to 50 Arab leaders there. He received a royal welcome. They all loved him, and he told them, you can stop international terrorism. You have the power. You're Arab leaders. And they all came to his side. Furthermore, all of them are afraid of Iran because Iran is Shia Muslim. They were all Sunni Muslims. Now they're looking for a protector because Iran has Russia, Iran has Iraq, but they really had no one. Plus, Iran is moving toward nuclear weapons. And here Saudi Arabia is going to be left out there with Jordan and Israel. They really do not have the power to defend themselves. But if they could form an alliance with America and Israel, now they would have tremendous military power on their side. So all this was being said behind closed doors. President Trump left Saudi Arabia and he flew directly to Israel. This had never been allowed before because Saudi Arabia did not recognize Israel's right to exist. But nobody said a word because now then they were on President Trump's side. June the 1st came, and it's time to move the embassy. You remember every 6 months it has to be done? And everybody was saying, okay, he promised he would do it. He prides himself on keeping his promises. Will he? Well, June the 1st came, and 3 or 4 days later, it's announced that Trump is going to delay moving the embassy to Jerusalem. Everybody said, just like all the other politicians. But the White House said the embassy would be moved as part of the anticipated Palestinian-Israeli peace agreement that Trump and his staff was working on. Well, this alarmed the U.S. government. And on June the 6th, just a few days later, the U.S. Senate unanimously endorsed an undivided Jerusalem as Israel's capital, reaffirming the Jerusalem Embassy Act of 1995. It was unanimous. The Senate doesn't do hardly anything unanimous, but they did this time, reaffirming to President Trump, you promised we need to move our embassy to Jerusalem and stand by our friend Israel. Now, in addition to that, Donald Trump could read polls. He's really good at reading polls. And a poll was taken in Israel which indicated that 87% of Israelis prefer United Jerusalem over a peace agreement. When asked whether they would reconsider their position if they knew that without a partition of the old city, sharing it with the Arabs, with the Palestinians, no final status agreement would ever be possible, 87% said that consideration would not alter their opinion. They said, we're not willing to surrender Jerusalem for anything. We have entered into a covenant. This is our eternal, undivided capital. All at the same time, every embassy of every nation in the world is up in Tel Aviv because that's what the UN told them to do, including America's. Nobody has their embassy in Jerusalem, even though the Knesset, which is their parliament, is in Jerusalem. The prime minister lives in Jerusalem. The Supreme Court is in Jerusalem. All the governmental offices are in Jerusalem. But it's like they're playing a game. It's like the emperor with no clothes on. Oh, no, your capital is Tel Aviv. That's what was going on in the world. And all the time, the Senate is saying, we are endorsing Jerusalem as the capital, the undivided capital of the nation of Israel. Okay. Well, in the meantime, Jason Greenblatt is still out here doing his work. And on August the 29th of 2017, Mahmoud Abbas, the head of the Palestinians, asked Greenblatt and the United States to present a Middle East peace plan. He said, look, we've discussed everything. You know where we stand. You know where Israel stands. You're the only power on earth that can break the tie. We're asking you to present a Middle East peace plan so that both sides can either accept it or reject it. Donald Trump requested 3 to 4 months to finalize such a plan, promising to present it. Then, on September the 18th through the 20th, Trump continues to work on the Middle East peace plan because when they all gather in New York for the UN General Assembly, that's an excellent time to get together without anybody having to do extra travel. So on side meetings, Trump met with Netanyahu, he met with Abbas, he met with King Abdullah II, he met with Egyptian President al-Sisi during the UN General Assembly. Now, Trump went ahead in response to Abbas. He promised a peace deal. He asked Abbas to give him time to produce a deal. Netanyahu went to his cabinet and told the Israeli cabinet members that Trump was preparing a peace deal. So the anticipation was building. Are we on the brink? Okay. So that brings us to now. Where are we right now? On December the 6th, 2017, that deadline rolled around again. Will Trump sign the waiver, or will he recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital, and will he move the embassy? On December the 6th, Donald Trump rocked this world by stepping to the microphone and saying, America is recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of the nation of Israel, and we will be moving our embassy there as quickly as is possible. And the whole world said, wait, we are on the brink of presentation of this peace agreement you've been working on ever since your inauguration 11 months ago. Why did you blow it all up? Because the reaction of the Arabs worldwide was explosive and indignant. Well, most of the Arabs, not Saudi Arabia, not the United Arab Emirates, not a lot said by Egypt. So here's the big question. Why did President Trump take it now? We really thought he would probably say, okay, we're going to do it, but we want to do it within the context of this peace agreement we're getting ready to reach. He didn't do that. So I want to ask you this question. Why? I think there's a reason. Is he just a spontaneous person that just does whatever comes to him, or did he have a method behind the madness? Is he perhaps sly like a fox? Well, let's watch as Greenblatt, Kushner, and Trump sit down together in private. They lay all their cards on the table. Where are we? What is possible? Well, almost everything can be agreed. And Trump says, are there any deal breakers? And they all look at him and say, yes, there's one. Because Israel is never going to yield Jerusalem. But the Palestinians say there will be no peace agreement unless we have East Jerusalem as our capital. That's the deal breaker. So Trump thinks in his mind, okay, I would rather not go through all this trauma and get to the end and everything break down over Jerusalem. So maybe there's another solution. What if I just take the Jerusalem issue off the table? I mean, after all, Jerusalem has been the capital of Israel for the last 3,000 years, and they've never had another capital. The Palestinians, their capital has never been Jerusalem. So who should yield on this point? The decision was made. He said, I can offer the Palestinians a state. Nobody else can do that. The United States is the only power with enough influence over Israel to bring them to make painful compromises. But they won't compromise on the Jerusalem issue. So I'm going to go ahead and recognize Jerusalem as their capital and go ahead and commit to moving our embassy there. And yes, it will be explosive, but I think when everything calms down, we can talk to them behind the scenes and say, this is the only chance for peace, the only chance. So what happened? Well, the UN Security Council met on December the 18th, just 12 days after Trump made his announcement, and they came together and they offered a resolution demanding that the U.S. reverse its recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital, because now Trump is going against Resolution 2334, which had been passed by President Obama. Now then, it's international law, but Trump is violating international law. So now they come together, and at a UN Security Council meeting, they demand that Trump rescind his decision. But when the votes were taken, yes, it was 14-1. But the one vote belonged to the United States of America, which has absolute veto power on the UN Security Council. So it was dead. But Mahmoud Abbas, the Palestinians, was not giving up. He now goes to the UN General Assembly. The UN General Assembly adopted a resolution condemning U.S. recognition of Jerusalem on December the 21st. So Trump does his recognition on the 6th. The 18th UN Security Council resolution is vetoed. Now they're going to the General Assembly, where the United States has no veto, but the decisions of the UN General Assembly are also meaningless except for propaganda value. So they take the vote, and while we're moving toward the vote, Trump threatened to cut off foreign aid from nations that vote against the U.S. Now, we give $750 million a year to the Palestinians, and we give a lot of money to a lot of other nations. But when the vote was taken, 128 nations voted for the resolution against Israel U.S. moving its embassy to Jerusalem, and only 9 voted against. It was Israel, the United States, and it was many other small nations such as Micronesia, Marshall Islands, but no nations of significance. There were 35 nations that abstained from voting, and then there were 21 that just managed to be absent that day. So a total of 65 nations did not vote for it, but 128 nations did. This action is meaningless, except for propaganda value. Then Mahmoud Abbas said the U.S. can no longer lead Middle East peace efforts. First of all, Abbas desperately wants someone else to lead the effort. He'd like for the UN or for Russia or for France or for someone else, because he feels like they will take the Palestinian side. He says Trump can no longer lead the effort. Now, Putin had offered to host peace talks about a year before that, and Mahmoud Abbas would probably like to see that. Now, there's a big problem, though, with what Abbas wants to happen. The United States is the only power with the leverage to influence Israel to make the necessary, painful compromises to actually reach a two-state solution. Now, Saudi Arabia wasn't saying much, but it warned Mahmoud Abbas, Trump's peace plan is the only game in town. And furthermore, you know, you're 82 years of age and you're not very popular, and you can't get along without the financial support of the United States, of Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates. We give you over $1 billion a year to prop up your government that is not self-sustaining. So what's going to happen? Will Abbas perhaps even be removed from power? All right, now we've tried to describe this whole situation. Now we come to the most important point. Point number 4. What do the prophecies say will happen? The prophecies never fail. They always come to pass. First of all, there is going to be a peace agreement. Very importantly, when that agreement is signed, according to the prophecies of the Bible, it will mark the beginning of the final 7 years to the Battle of Armageddon. So this is one of those few prophecies that have a date attached to it. It has a timeline attached to it. Peace agreement, 7 years later, the Battle of Armageddon, and the return of Jesus Christ to this earth. So that makes this very, very important. Now, since there's going to be a peace agreement signed, the prophecies also say a Palestinian state will be created. The agreement will involve land swaps. Israel will trade some concentrations of Arab populations presently within her borders for areas that are under Jewish control right now and bringing those into Israel's borders, there will be land swaps. Both sides have endorsed land swaps in past negotiations. Settlers who presently live in the area that will become the new Palestinian state will be allowed to stay there as a Jewish minority. The reasoning will be, well, there's 1.6 million Arabs living within Israel. Why can't we have 300,000 or 400,000 Jews living in the Palestinian state? That's going to happen. Furthermore, they've got to deal with the Temple Mount, because the Jews are not going to ever be satisfied until they can pray up there in the place where God said, I will put my name there. It was the location of their first temple, their second temple, and they will never settle until they're able to worship there. So how do you solve this problem? According to the Bible, Revelation 11, verse 1 and 2, the Temple Mount is going to be placed under a sharing arrangement so that the Jewish temple can be built on the Jewish portion of the Temple Mount without disturbing the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque. It's going to be the big compromise. Furthermore, the Bible teaches that the third temple will be built on the Temple Mount. Now, what else do we know? We know this agreement is going to be an interim agreement, not a permanent agreement. Why is it going to be an interim agreement? Because ultimately, they will not yield on the status of Jerusalem. The status of Jerusalem is going to be put on hold because they get everything else settled. They get back to the Jerusalem, and still the Palestinians will not yield, and still Israel will not yield. And so whoever's conducting the negotiations will say, look, we're almost there. Let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Let's go ahead and implement all the rest. And then 7 years from now, we will try again to settle the Jerusalem problem. It appears, according to the prophecy, that this interim agreement will last for 7 years. Now, is there evidence these elements in the prophecies have already been negotiated in past negotiations? Because there have been many of them. A Palestinian state will be created. Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, endorsed the two-state solution in his Bar-Ilan speech of 2009. Settlers will remain in the new Palestinian state as a Jewish minority. It was disclosed that Netanyahu, during the 2014 negotiations, demanded settlers be allowed to remain in Palestine after the future peace deal. That was disclosed in Haaretz Media, June the 11th of 2017. The Temple Mount will be shared. Former President Bill Clinton proposed place in the Temple Mount under a sharing arrangement way back in the year 2000 when he was negotiating with Ehud Barak and Yasser Arafat at Camp David. Jews will never sign an agreement permanently banishing them from the Temple Mount. So it's going to be shared. The third temple will be built. The Bible prophesies in several places that there will be a temple built, and it will happen during the first 3.5 years of the final 7 years. So there's going to be the Jewish temple built on the Temple Mount, and they are getting ready. All the furniture, all the utensils for the temple have now been completed. Here you can see the candelabra. That stands 6 feet high. You can see the altar of incense, the table of shewbread. Those are the 3 pieces of furniture that go in the holy place. And then they now have created, as of November of 2013, a new Ark of the Covenant, which they say they will use until they find the original. And if they never find the original, this is it, the Ark of the Covenant, which will go in the Holy of Holies. That was the last piece they needed. Everything else is ready. Well, they do have one problem. In order for Jews to go up to worship on the Temple Mount, they have to be purified from contact with a dead body. Numbers 19 tells us all about that. In order to be purified, you have to take a red heifer upon whom has never been a yoke, that's spotless. She must be sacrificed, the body burnt, the ashes mingled with water, and a person bathes in this mixture, and it purifies them from any contact with a dead body. If they've walked through a cemetery, if they visited a funeral home, if they've been in a hospital when anyone has died. Well, they've got to have this, and they do not have it today. However, in 2015, they launched a huge project. They bought a ranch They hired an expert cattle rancher, and they are trying to produce this red heifer. There are 5 red Angus cows that are currently carrying calves that will be born in 2018. They hope one of those calves will be the red heifer. That'd be the last link in the chain that will allow them to build the third temple. Okay. So here's what we know. Jerusalem will not be divided. So how close then are we to the peace agreement? Mahmoud Abbas told Trump in September a peace deal can be reached this year. Palestinian leader says deal of the century can be reached in a matter of months. The U.S. president pledges to devote his heart and soul to reaching the peace agreement between Israel and the Palestinians, adding, I think we have a pretty good shot. Maybe the best shot ever. That was carried by Reuters on September the 20th of 2017. But after the U.S. recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital, Mahmoud Abbas said the United States could no longer play the lead role in the Middle East peace process. We don't even want to see your proposed agreement. However, Jason Greenblatt is somewhere right now in the Middle East working, and there's no news about what he's doing. Is he working? Is he talking to the Saudi Arabians? Is he talking to the Egyptians? Is he talking to the Jordanians? Is he talking to the people from the United Arab Emirates? Getting them to lean on Mahmoud Abbas to change his mind? Because President Trump said when he recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital, he did say, this does not settle the final status of Jerusalem. That will be done between the Palestinians and the Israelis. So he left the door open for that to be negotiated. So after Mahmoud Abbas cools down and after Saudi Arabia says, hey, Trump's plan is the only plan in town. This is the best chance you'll ever get. And remember, they're building out there in the West Bank every day, and all the land that you want for your state's going to be gone if you keep waiting, waiting, waiting. So you better act. Big question. Will it be peace, or are we going to end up in Armageddon? Here's the big answer. Both. We're going to have a peace agreement. Then 7 years later, the Battle of Armageddon will occur. Here you can see a timeline that shows you how events are going to unfold according to the prophecies of the Bible. We're somewhere either a few months or a few years before the signing of the Middle East peace agreement. Once it's signed, during the first 3.5 years, the temple will be built, animal sacrifices will be resumed. Then halfway through, the Antichrist will stop those sacrifices and claim to be Messiah and God. That launches the Great Tribulation, and then everything will continue, finally culminating in the invasion of Israel by the United Nations to force Israel to divide Jerusalem. So now you see the big picture. This is going to happen. It's all specifically prophesied in the Bible. Now you see the big picture of Trump, Jerusalem, Armageddon.
Okay, so here we go. The peace agreement, actually, just a quick update on this. The peace agreement actually was revealed in earlier this year, like I think it's Jan, Feb, and then it was postponed, and then until Jan and end of Jan this year anyway. So we know exactly what's in the peace agreement right now. It includes everything. The only one thing that is not mentioned exactly 100% is the building of the temple. but it says actually that everyone is going to be allowed to worship there. So it doesn't mention the build of the temple, but it says that everyone is going to be able to worship there. So right now only the Muslim are allowed, but everyone is going to be allowed according to this peace agreement. And then we'll see if it is the peace agreement. We don't know. If it is the peace agreement, then within 3.5 years we should see the temple, the third temple being built. So I got a couple of things that I took notes during this stuff. It was talking about the red heifer at the end. The red heifer actually as well. He mentioned 2018. We're gonna have a red heifer ready. There are a couple, I think 2 without any blemish, but or 2, and then now there's only 1, but I'm not sure. There are red heifers right now that are good to purify the. I'm not gonna do an history of the. Explain why the red heifer. He mentioned it a bit, to purify the Israelis, basically, to be able to go to the temple. They need a red heifer. It's not the same as the sacrifice that we see in the Bible. A red heifer is to purify the people, to be able to worship on the Temple Mount. So basically, this is going to be ready. I think it's January as well. So they have 1 or 2 that are going to be that are without any blemish, they call it. So perfectly red. So we'll see if it's still perfectly red. In January. It has to be it has to enter its 3rd year, basically 3 years old, but enter the 3rd year to be good. So they're gonna be able to sacrifice it and purify the people. The peace plan, I've talked a bit about it before, but just to mention again, Netanyahu, actually the map is going to be ready in beginning of July. Basically at the beginning of July, Netanyahu is going to be able to separate basically the according to the map. It's going to be all mapped out for the states, basically the 2 states. So 2 states is in there and they're mapping it right now. So and the earliest they can do it is 1st of I'm saying first, but beginning of July. I'm not sure if it's the first, but of July. But beginning of July, basically, Israel, Netanyahu is going to be allowed to start implementing the peace agreement. So that's why, like, this is a couple of years ago, but right now, actually, Palestinians were freaking out, as you know, because of everything that's going on. But right now, actually, they're turning around because they're seeing that they're losing the great opportunity, basically, and they started talking with other. I think it's Russia. They want Russia to preside. We're talking about the peace agreement as well. We know that the peace agreement, if it is the peace agreement that's going to start in the final 7 years, the Antichrist is going to confirm it with many. So this is why it's very important that it goes to the United Nations, because that's how it would fit this prophecy, basically, where the Antichrist is going to be within the many, and we're going to recognize the Antichrist at 6.5 years, as we know, at the 3.5 years at the abomination of desolation. So basically, the Antichrist, that's where he's going to be revealed, but he's going to start basically being in the picture before that. So he's going to confirm the covenant with many, so he should be part of the peace agreement. So going to the United Nations probably, so he's going to be probably one of the leaders at the United Nations, which he's going to take over later on as his world government. Obama, we talked about Obama before. He said, so it's about 6 months ago, I think, actually, Irvin had a head of journalist at Jerusalem Post, I think it's Jerusalem Post, one of the Israeli news newspaper or news now. So he had them, and what he mentioned is Obama was so hated. So everybody had the role. God perfectly picked every president, every prime minister, even. But Obama, basically, what he had to say about Obama is that Obama was so hated in the Middle East, basically the Sunnis, mostly for what he did with Iran, backing Iran and all that, that they actually united. They united with Israel because they all saw Iran as a threat. So basically, Obama, what he did, without knowing, obviously, he prepared the floor, basically, or the red he unrolled the red carpet for Trump to show up. And so that's why he was so loved. Trump is so loved in the Middle East right now, even the Arab countries, because they're all scared of Iran, which is backed by Russia. Yeah, and they actually recognize Israel as a nation. So those Muslim countries that never did before. Obviously, the embassy has been moved, and to Israel. I actually went there with MJ when we went to Israel. So the embassy, the Israeli embassy, is in Jerusalem right now. Okay, just a couple more things about Trump since that video. Trump, one of the first things that Trump did actually is the TPP, Trans-Pacific Partnership. I don't know if you heard about it, but it's one of the first things. It's an economic pact, basically, which Trump got out of. Basically, if what they were saying is that was worth about 40% of all transaction economy, transaction in the world, and the UN would have been in control of about 90% of all the economy if they. So basically, Trump wants to deal one-on-one. He doesn't want to have somebody else direct his deals. So that's why he's redoing all the deals, but directly with the countries, instead of going through the UN and the UN presiding. So he did that. He got out of the human rights, got out of Paris Accord, got out of UNESCO, and recently got out of not got out. He didn't get out of the WHO, but he's cutting the fund. So we can see that Trump has been moving out of the United Nations influence, basically, and this is exactly what the prophecy says. And if you sit down and start looking at why would the U.S. do this really for Israel at the UN and stuff like that, so obviously the U.S. is probably not going to get out because it's going to keep applying its veto against the anti-Semite resolutions and stuff like that. So everything against Israel, there's so many resolutions that they try to pass at the UN, I think, against Israel alone. What they say is there's more resolutions that are passed against Israel alone than all the other ones all put together at the UN. So so that's why Nikki Haley, the last ambassador to the UN, the US ambassador to the UN, basically she actually bluntly told them that they were anti-Semite right in their face. So basically, this is what's going on. The US is supposed to protect Israel until the end. Take it to its safe place. So basically, the Bible says so, and that's what it's clearly doing. And since Trump took over, basically, it's not a political speech. It's just that seeing what Trump is doing, basically, it's all according to the Bible. So that's why we see that all the prophecies are coming together after, because mainly basically it's only since 2016. So before that, people were wondering what's going on, Israel and and the USA basically should be turning back and getting out of protecting Israel and getting out of the UN, but nothing was going according to the Bible or the end time prophecies. But now we see it like all turning around. So obviously, if this peace plan is not the peace plan, something else is gonna have to develop to look exactly the same. But it looks like it could be the peace plan, and if it is the peace plan, then it's going to mark the beginning of the finest 7 years. So it's very interesting to follow it at least and understand, so that we're not deceived, because obviously the last 3.5 years are going to be the great tribulations, and the Antichrist is going to take over, and a lot of people right now we see the influence of the UN, the United Nations, is very influential on all governments. Like if you look at the number one goal of the UN is ID everyone on Earth, and take the weapons away so that they can control everyone, and people don't have a way to revolt or to go against it, what they say. So that's pretty much it. So we'll hopefully you had a good time. See no more questions on the chat or anything like that. So say a quick prayer and we'll carry on. It's already 8:30, so to go a little longer today, but hopefully you enjoyed that video. It was a quick history, a little bit of history, but it's good that we understand where the temples, the history behind the temples. Oh, one quick thing that I thought, if you Google Trump Cyrus coin, they actually Jerusalem, the Israelis basically, they have a coin. They made a coin. You remember King Cyrus, the first temple? Well, there is actually a coin with Trump, which had to do with the lesson. I thought it matched with the lesson, but so you can Google this. I could bring it, probably try this. I'm gonna try something quick here and just show you. I'll fade one quick. So if you want to know more about that coin, just Google it. So there is actually a coin for because of everything that Trump is doing for Israel. So it's pretty much it. So Lord, I want to thank you for bringing us all together again. Thank you for those lessons, the people that took the time to prepare those lessons, to study your word, and to follow the events of the world, so that we can learn and not be deceived, my Lord. So that's and that we can bring people to you, and that they're not deceived as well, my Lord, and increase our understanding of the Bible, so that it increase our faith when we see all those prophecies coming together, my Lord, so that we know that there's nothing in the Bible that's that's a lie, or that we can we can say that everything in the Bible, so that we can trust in every word that you have put in there, and so increase our faith through these prophecies, and increase our wisdom and tools to be able to witness to others, my Lord. So I want to pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, so hopefully you guys had a good one. We'll see you on Sunday. I'm pretty sure I'm not missing anything special this week. I think it's only the next is Sunday. So Sunday 10:30 from church, we're gonna have service, Sunday service. So have a good one.